Coming up on More Than Before.
Everything that I thought I knew, everything I thought about money, everything I thought I knew about business, everything I thought I knew about life was caving in on top of me. God was dealing with my pride, stripping anything and everything from me that I could tie my identity to outside of Him.
This is More Than Before with Nathan Cook.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. I am so incredibly blessed for our guest today. Years ago, when my wife and I, we were having some trouble in our marriage, we reached out to him and his wife, and they helped us take our marriage from impending separation to a rock-solid marriage. So much so that my wife and I actually became certified through him and his company as marriage coaches. They have trained and certified over 100 couples from across the globe. He and his wife have facilitated their divine process, which has taken hundreds of marriages and families from death to new life. He is the founder of Married for a Purpose, a veteran, a father, a good friend of mine, but most importantly, a man of principle who has a passion for seeing marriages and families restored. Greg Gorman, welcome to the show. So incredibly blessed to have you.
Oh man, it's great to be here, Nathan. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it's funny because we go way back, and I remember from our time, with the Maxwell organization, you and I, we had a lot of interactions. We didn't get to spend a lot of time together, but in those brief moments of interactions, there was kind of this kindred spirit of family, and you truly do have a huge vision for family. Family just, it exudes from who you are. And you wrap people around your arms and you say, hey, come into the family. And I love that. What was childhood like for you growing up? Who was Greg Gorman as a kid?
Oh, that's a great question. So let me rewind there and get to that space. I was not a popular kid by any stretch of the imagination. In retrospect, I think I was probably pretty well thought of, or certainly more well thought of and better received than what I had any idea. I just had a lot of insecurities, but I was definitely not the in kid. Most of my clothes came from a yard sale. I got teased a lot for having high waters on, which are, pants that would come up about this high on my boots,
And that was before they were popular, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was not the in thing. But honestly, there's a lot of things that were wonderful about my childhood, and that I grew up on a farm way out in the country. 15 miles from the nearest town, and it only had about 4,500 people in it. So you had to drive 2 hours in just about any direction to get to a town that had any more than 35, maybe 40,000 people. Like, no kidding. Way off out in the boonies in Missouri. But I learned a lot about work ethic, living on a farm, and caring for animals. And it was expected of me. We heated with wood. So, going out and sawing up wood and stacking it and then throwing it down in the basement, and all that good stuff. But my childhood was tough. And when I say this, and there's times when I go into a little bit more detail about, some of the happenings in my childhood, and we can do that or not. But when I say that, I think it's important for me, at least, to say that, everybody's got a tough childhood story, or at least something, and I'm certainly not in any competition. There's people out there that had a much worse life for sure, and a much worse childhood than what I did. But there were definitely a lot of challenges. Whereas my parents divorced when I was about 8 or 9, somewhere around in there. And then, man, things were really, really dicey. They were dicey before that, but they were really dicey after that for several years.
I love it because, first of all, just how authentic you are. And one of the things that I love about you, Greg, is your authenticity, because you truly are authentic. You wear not necessarily your emotions on your sleeve, but you're not afraid to give your opinion and your thoughts towards something. Really any subject. And I love that because there are so few people that are willing to do that, to stand up for something. And I'm actually a little bit curious, like, what was school like for you as you were growing up? Because I think school has a little bit of that shaping nature to it based off the cohorts that were around. When you say you grew up on a farm and everything was, 2 miles away in any direction, immediately I think of, the stories of, grandparents and parents saying, well, I had to walk to school through 5 feet of snow. And I almost kind of see you doing that possibly. But what was school like for you growing up?
Well, as I mentioned, I definitely wasn't in the in crowd or the popular kid. You referenced this and you asked the question after, mentioning authenticity and things of that nature. And I am very authentic. I believe that it's important to be authentic and very real because it's my mistakes and my humanity that people can relate to. I feel like when we teach or when we talk and we share from our vulnerabilities and our mess ups, then it makes people think, well, wow, maybe I'm not as jacked up as I thought I was because this guy's doing okay now and he went through this. But the truth is that I've changed a lot, Nathan, since I was in school. Because I had a lot of insecurities. Part of that was due to my upbringing at home. And then a lot of it is just because, I carried those insecurities and kind of a nervous kid, so to speak, into school. I just wanted to be well liked. I wanted to be well received. And so I was a bit of a chameleon. And actually, it was something I had to work on a lot in my adult years with a lot of self-awareness and a lot of just really going deep. And it was something that I didn't like about myself. Because I found myself sometimes in conversations, like if I were talking to you and you had a strong opinion on a particular subject matter, and you know me now. And so you would probably never guess this about me, that it used to be a struggle, and it's not a struggle anymore. God delivered me of it. But if you had a strong opinion about something, you could probably sell me into your idea. And I'd be like, yeah, that's what I think too. Yeah, that's what I believe. But then I might, within 24 hours, find myself in a very similar conversation with someone on the opposite side of the fence. And I would absolutely find myself going, yeah, that's what I believe, And so it made me very a chameleon. So it wasn't that I was trying to be deceptive. It was just that I was a pretty easy sell, and I wasn't sure what I felt about things. And I think that as a result of that, again, as I became older and I began to mature and I started having more and more self-awareness and was very intentional about that, I started doing a deeper dive on it and really developed a set of principles for my life. And so those that know me now, or have for the last probably 2 decades, would know me as being someone who is very firm in what he believes, and very principled in why I believe what I believe, or why I do what I do. And I would just encourage any of your viewers or listeners, to think, if they're struggling with that chameleon stuff, to think in terms of being principled. Because when we develop principles, what's awesome is that it actually makes us more attractive, not less attractive. You would think, just agree with everybody and it's all okay. And that's great, but nobody will ever have any strong opinions or really seek you out for anything, or you really will have a hard time bringing value. And so for me, I really wanted to bring a lot of value, and I knew that I needed to develop a set of principles. And then once I had those principles, then it allowed me to navigate not only conversations, but all the decisions in life, big or little, because it comes back to a principle. And if I can align it with the principle, then very quickly, it allows me to make very, very quick decisions most of the time, which has helped me in parenting and, being a good spouse, or striving to be, and being a good Christian, and certainly along the way in business decisions and such, because if you got a set of principles, then you've got a floor to build from.
I love that, because I don't think a lot of people operate on principles today. In fact, I think a lot of people operate in a way that we would look at them. And I love that you say the word, you weren't trying to be deceptive. In fact, I would almost say you weren't trying to be deceptive, but you were trying to be accepted. Most people in life are just trying to fit in somewhere, and they don't feel like they fit in somewhere. And I can feel that from your childhood of just trying to find a place where you could be accepted for who you were, right? Background, especially as a kid, you show up with all this baggage, and you don't know that it's baggage until you look at other people's lives and realize, oh, other people aren't like this. Other families aren't like this. Now, there's a lot of different influences that you've had. You've had some really big influencers in your life. And I love hearing about the big influences, but I also really love hearing about the smaller influences in life that most people don't consider. And I know one of those was your grandmother. Your grandmother had a huge influence on your life. Tell us a little bit about what that influence was like from her, and how has that carried into your adult years today?
Yeah. Thank you for asking that. Again, living way out in the country, it wasn't like I could go down the street and play with my friends, especially when I was young. And so I always had an affinity with the older crowd. And because there was so much chaos in my home, I actually was raised, a good deal of my childhood was being raised by my grandparents. And I pretty much idolized both of them. But in particular, as you mentioned, my grandmother. Now, even to this day, there's something deep inside of me. I love to grow things. Like, I am a legit farmer, right? I love raising animals and things of that nature, but I really love planting things and then growing them and then handling the harvest. And so we had 1, 2, 3, 4. We had like 5 large gardens on my grandmother's property. And so I spent days and days and days out there in that garden with her, anywhere from pulling weeds to learning how to hoe to learning how to plant, and then harvesting and then processing after we harvested. I can remember breaking beans, or pitting cherries or, canning things, like all this stuff. And so I spent a lot of time with her, and she was always patient enough that she could be with me, and I never felt like an imposition. And so where I lacked feeling loved everywhere else in life, when I was with my grandma, I really felt love and I never questioned it. And so she had a lot of influence, a tremendous amount of influence on me. And when I think about my spiritual foundations, she planted so many awesome seeds. One conversation that I remember specifically, I was just a little bitty dude. Like, it's crazy that I even remember this. I don't even know if I was in school yet. I might have been in kindergarten or something. She said that King Solomon, when God told him to pray, he could pray for anything and ask for anything that he wanted. And King Solomon chose to pray for wisdom. And for some reason in my little mind, like, that made such a deep impression. I'm getting choked up because even today, I have seriously spent my entire life praying for wisdom and asking for wisdom. And it is my first prayer. There are many things, many desires that I have. Desires for a good income, desires for health, a desire for, a good relationship with my kids and my wife and things of that nature. But I can tell you even today that wisdom is the leading prayer probably that I've prayed more than any other prayer over the course of my life. And it's because of that conversation, because she basically, she explained to me in whatever way my little bitty mind could receive it at the time that that God was pleased with him for praying that prayer. And as I have gone back and read that story, I realize that the reason God was so pleased with that prayer is because, again, he could have asked for so many different things, but he asked for a specific wisdom. He asked for wisdom to know how to lead the people, right? And what a great prayer. Again, I apologize for the emotion around that, but it still touches me because I want to lead well. I do. And like many of us, I want my life to count, and it matters deeply to me. And I think that if I can just stay surrendered in a place where I lay my own will down to receive his will, and believe me when I tell you, I've not lived my whole life this way, but if I can lay my will down and trust him enough to believe that his will is actually better than the will that I think is better, right? Then I open myself to be able to receive wisdom, not only lead well, but to be able to just maximize the blessings in my life.
I love that so much because I've been reading a lot about Solomon recently and just praying for wisdom. And wisdom is truly one of those things that we should be praying for. But a lot of people, I think when they think about praying for wisdom, they think of, well, I want to be really smart so I can do this. And the prayer of wisdom that Solomon prayed, which you just said, was to be able to lead well.
Right.
And not only lead well from man's perspective, but to lead well from God's perspective. And I think that's really one of the key differences that makes wisdom different from knowledge. And I think we need to focus on that. And one of the things about your life is there have been times where you haven't done everything right. Like we're not perfect, but there was a season of your life several years ago. You had a crossroad experience in your faith where you actually seemed to do everything right, but yet you lost everything and you tried everything to hold life together. And yet everything still fell apart. Can you describe that a little bit of what led you to that place? What happened and how did you move through that?
Yeah, well, I appreciate that question. This is it was a significant breakthrough for me, but it was a really significant challenge as well. So, I guess I'll start. I had been in life and health insurance in that industry and really had done well. Ran a branch office with over 100 producing weekly agents. Anybody in that business knows that if you're, in life and health insurance and you've got 100 unique producers a week, that's a big operation.
Yeah.
And we had actually taken that office from dead last in the organization to number one in the organization just within a couple of years too. So a very, very blessed season. And I can remember as Julie and I grew and did well in that industry, we were sought out for a lot of different interviews and to go and do leadership training and just talk about what we were doing and things of that nature. And we were always really easy for us to give the credit and the glory to God and all of that. And so many times I can remember people responding back to me, yeah, but, yes, but you, and, you guys took risk and yes, you did things differently. And, and so I think after a while, I kind of started to believe my press. And as grateful as I was like, I actually have done a lot of things other people wouldn't do. And I actually did push back on the home office when they said to do this, and I did that, and really started kind of, right? And so pride began to creep in, and it was completely unbeknownst to me. And pride's peculiar because it cloaks itself. Sometimes it even cloaks itself in nobility or false pride or false humility and things of that nature. And so as time went on, I ended up leaving that industry because the organization that I was with, I just felt like they were becoming disintegrous, and it seemed like they were becoming more disintegrous and wanting to leverage kind of the relationships that we'd built to take advantage of people. And I just wasn't in for that. And so I walked away from a pile of money, was very prayerful about this. And then we ended up moving from Kentucky to Texas. And then within less than a year from Texas down to Florida, every move, everything that we did, these were big moves, because we were pretty happy where we were. And we were doing well. We were well respected. We were very sought after in our own communities and nationally within the industry. Even though we had covered all of this with prayer and had done what we felt like God was telling us to do one step at a time, it was just this, I just felt like I was on this roller coaster to hell. And I couldn't tell when the roller coaster ever bottomed out, and the ride no longer was fun at all. Just down, down, down. And I remember thinking, gosh, when did this end? When does this end? And we went from making $1 million a year to going almost 7 years without any income, went 4 years without any income, and then another 3 years with income that wasn't even enough to pay basic bills. And for somebody that had been the man, like I was rock star status, everywhere I went, church, in a community, in my organization, I was highly sought out. And I found myself down here in South Florida, a little bit of south of where we live right now. And I just felt completely invisible. I felt like I had no purpose. Anything that I thought I knew had completely come in question. And so I was really in a dark place, Nathan. I mean, a really, really dark place. And this again, it had gone on for some time. This downward pull. I couldn't even provide for my family, right? And this is a guy that used to make $1 million a year. I remember going to the grocery store and feeling guilty getting groceries because I was putting them on a credit card that I knew I had no way to pay for and had no idea when I would be able to. At one point, I was driving home, and it had been a really, really tough week. This had endured for a while. And I remember I'd had a conversation with Julie, and she was like, well, have you read Job? Maybe you should spend some time in Job. And
the greatest book to read when you're feeling low.
Yeah. Dude, but I had been reading Job because I was just trying to make sense of what was going on. And I told her, I said, I have read Job. And I'll tell you what it sounds like to me. It sounds like a movie I watched back in the 80s with Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy called Trading Places. Like God and Satan get in a conversation, and God just chucks a guy who's doing what he's supposed to do, a guy who is the example to follow on the earth at that point, who that's how he came up, was because he was so honorable and doing everything so well. And God chucks him under the bus. I said, what kind of God does that? I don't understand that God. Like I don't really get what that was all about, right? And so I was in, like I said, a really dark place. And then she had responded to me that day. She said, well, the only thing that I know is that our story's not finished yet. So I was driving by myself a few days later, and I was just really, truly at the end of everything. I was at the end of myself, really. And I remember easing my car off to the side of the road, and I'm like, okay, today's the day. Something changes. I'd contemplated suicide. I had literally contemplated suicide, and I'm not the type, you know what I mean? That it wasn't that I threatened suicide. Like I quietly contemplated it, right? Mm-hmm. And so I was really just in a sad place, and I eased the car off the road, and I thought to myself, do I actually believe what I have professed my entire life that I believe? And as I pondered the question, I really could not answer the question. And you have to understand, the reason I'm asking this question is because everything that I thought I knew, everything I thought about money, everything I thought I knew about business, everything I thought I knew about life was caving in on top of me like I didn't know anything. And I think in retrospect, if I may, God was dealing with my pride, and he was stripping anything. In addition to that, he was stripping anything and everything from me that I could tie my identity to outside of him. And so as I sat there, what I was thinking, Nathan, is I was actually thinking like, okay, look, if this is not real, if this faith thing, this Jesus that I believe in, if this is not real, then I just need to let this stuff go. Why be burdened with all the rules and the rule book, and trying to make sure I'm doing it all right and everything? Why don't you just think about for myself and figure things out? And so I was really looking to leave the faith. And I remember asking myself, okay, so I don't know the answer to the question, can I walk away? The second question I was prompted with was, is there any way I can walk away? Is there any way I cannot believe? Is there any way I cannot believe what I profess my whole life to believe? And so that's a deeper question. It's a higher quality question, actually. And it gets right down to the root of the matter. And as I asked that and I began to ponder it, it took me several minutes, but I realized as I look back over my life, I'm like, rats, there's no way I cannot believe. I believe. I do. I believe. I can't help but believe. So what was so cool about that, Nathan, is that I think that so often I had allowed myself to sort of believe. I'm going to deal with that in just a second. But as I thought through that question and realized I made a decision that day, I'm going to live like I believe. I'm going to live like I can trust him over me, like I can trust him and his goodness over my circumstances. And so often, if you're anything like me, I get caught up in my circumstances. My circumstances will attack my faith or they'll raise my faith. Neither one are really faith, though. You know? So a few days later, flipping through scripture, and I noticed that almost every single time that Jesus gave a healing, he said these words, "Be it unto you according to your faith." Or he would say something like, "It is your faith that has made you well." And so when I tell a story, often I say, I thought to myself, self, your faith's got something to do with your outcome. And I think sometimes I had really discounted that. Flip over a few more scriptures and I come across, the parable of the mustard seed. And Jesus is like, if you have faith the size of this mustard seed, you can say to this mountain to be moved and it will be moved. And I often challenge people, do you believe that? If you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain to be moved and it will be moved. Do you really believe that? It challenged me. I asked my wife, I said, Julie, what do you reckon the difference is between faith the size of a mustard seed versus faith of the very size of the very mountain it is that you're asking to be moved, right? And of course, as you know, we pondered it, and where we landed is that there's no different. And that's kind of that point where I was talking about reckoning with that sort of believing, because there's no difference. You either believe or you don't believe. We either believe or we doubt. And so where that's really served me, Nathan, is that when I find myself feeling like I sort of believe, first of all, I ask the question, belief in what? Again, belief in my circumstances, belief in what I can figure out maybe I could cause to happen. I can have faith for that really easy. I think I could, eventually, right? But that's not at all what the faith is that he's talking that made them well, or the faith that got them where they were going, or that mustard seed faith. It is absolute. It is belief. It's like being pregnant. You're never sort of pregnant. You're either pregnant or you're not pregnant. You either believe or you don't believe. And so now if I catch myself with a fraction of doubt, sort of believing, or I believe, right? I go in and I figure out where's the unbelief, where's the disbelief? Why can I not say I absolutely believe? And it really has helped my faith journey and my surrender really to his will, because if my faith is in him, that faith is big if I choose it. And even in those moments where I might doubt, I still have the ability to choose faith, right? Like, Lord, I don't know how all this works. I don't know what all this means, but what I do know, and I always come back to what I do know rather than what I don't know, is that I can trust you and that you love me and you want what's best for me, even though it may even feel like it hurts me. I trust you, and I give it to him, and it allows me to rest, man. It's given me so much peace. It's transformed everything I do and everything about me. It was a significant transition in my life and certainly in my faith.
Well, what I love about that, and even this focus on the mustard seed, kind of even going back to, your grandmother's garden and growing up and having this love of botany, of things growing. And when you get this picture that the Bible talks about of the faith the size of a mustard seed, and when a farmer's planting and they're putting the seed in the ground, they don't look at the seed and go, well, I hope that comes out to what I planted it as. Like you don't plant an apple seed and go, well, I hope that comes out as an apple tree. Maybe it'll come out as a pear tree. Like it doesn't work that way, right? Like it's whatever you're planting. And what's interesting about this all to me is when you plant the seed, you don't just walk away from it. Right? You can't just plant your faith and go, okay, well, I believe in God. And then you walk away and go, well, it's been 5 years since I've opened my Bible and I don't understand why I don't feel like I'm connected with God. And at the end of the day, you have to remember when a farmer plants the seed, the farmer tends to it. He goes back, he waters it. He makes sure that it's getting the appropriate amount of sunlight. If it gets getting too much sunlight, he shades it. Like the farmer has to do a lot of cultivating to make sure the seed can grow. And the same thing with our faith. And I love it because the version that I use, whenever it says faith, it says trust. And when you have the trust that God is going to pull you through, it's a lot different than going, well, maybe it'll happen. Maybe this will work out. There was also a time in your life too, with your marriage. And I would love to dive into this subject because I know this is something you're incredibly passionate about. It's what you've dedicated your life to, family and marriages, restoring those. And truly, like, when you go back and well, I'm not even going back. If you look at your life right now and people look at you and Julie, you and your wife are just like the adorable couple. Like when you see them, you almost feel like they're putting on a show and you're like, like you almost want to gag because you're like, this can't be real. Like they're putting this show on. But truly, like I have seen them behind closed doors. I have seen them in every kind of situation. This is who they are. And you look at their marriage and you go, man, like I want a marriage like that. And I bet the only way that I could ever have a marriage like that is if I grew up with a marriage like that. Like the only way you get that kind of marriage is if you saw that marriage growing up and you were around that and that was it has to be cultivated from a really, really young age. And you and I both know that's not true. It takes a lot of cultivating to get your marriage to a place where Greg and Julie are today. And so I would love for you to unpack that a little bit. Where did you and Julie find yourself years ago in your marriage? It was broken. There was a lot of stuff going on. Could you tell us a little bit about that and what ended up happening? I love hearing Julie's side of it a lot. But I don't feel like I ever get to hear your side of the story as much. And I would love to hear that. Like, what was your side of the story, what you were going through, what you were starting to process in your marriage, really holding it in rubble in your hands and going, I don't know what to do with this. And then that transformation that took place to get to where you are today.
Oh man. Yeah. That's another deep rabbit hole. So, you have to start really with just knowing that we just both came from so much brokenness, neither one of us had any successful marriage to pull from, any thriving marriages in our upbringing. Both of our parents were divorced. Julie and I both were married and divorced, before we met one another. And so we drug a tremendous amount of baggage from childhood, previous relationships. I mean, you name it, man. We drug baggage into our relationship. And so we were head over heels in love. But the first 2 years, we could barely stand to stay in the same room with one another more than, a few minutes because both of us were highly offendable. I had an irate, absolutely uncontrollable, violent, ugly temper. And very forceful and domineering when I was set off. So she had a lot to contend with. And Julie dealt with a lot of insecurities, a lot of jealousies and such, that were very, very deep seated in her spirit and in really who she was. And not who God created her to be, but who she had become through just life's journey. And so the first 2 years, as much as we loved one another, I mean, we fought aggressively. I felt like my job was to cut her down and make sure she knew her place, right? And so I was not an easy dude to live with, and I'm kind of demanding anyway. So if you put all that uncontrollability in there, it really just added insult to injury. And instead of responding to my wife and her insecurities with, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry you feel that way. I never meant to make you feel that way. Or, just apologizing, or, I always got on the defensive, whether I was guilty or not guilty was irrelevant. I just completely flew off the handle and just didn't handle that right. And so God had to teach me how to love her. God had to teach her how to love me as well, and how to deal with her insecurities and trust she would tell it that, something of the nature that she had to trust God with me rather than trying to control me. And I would say to a large degree, it was the same thing for me. I had to really learn to release that and think to myself. And I was a slow learner, so it took me a while. I was probably 7 years, about 7 years. We had two turning points, one at 2 years and one at 7 years, where there were different things that transpired that helped lead us through next layers of breakthrough. The first one is we got in a huge fight, and I was just fed up. I'm like, I cannot win for losing. I can't do anything right, and I can't do this anymore. I am sick of living like this. So I love you, but I'm out. And I went outside, got in the truck, and took off. And she fell on her face and started praying. And again, I don't want to give too much of this away because if you do have time with her, I'm sure she'll want to talk about this.
Oh yeah, but we're gonna have Julie on here in a little while. So this is the prequel of one side of the story. We'll get Julie's side of the story. No,
she'll get you can set the record straight, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But she had a real reckoning with God, where the short version of it is that God just really convicted her heart to find what she loved about me rather than what was lacking, and to trust me to Him instead of trying to fix me. And for me, that helped a lot because it helped me feel like Julie could receive my love now, right? And so that was the first one. The second one was actually, believe it or not, was I got busted looking at porn at about 7 years. And again, Julie was abused and sexually abused. And so for many years of our marriage, it wasn't that we weren't able to be intimate, but there was just a lot of tension, and a lot of struggle in intimacy. And so at 7 years, she caught me, but I owned up to it, and I was very honest with her about the struggle that I had been having, and it helped her build trust in me and realize, one, that I wasn't perfect and I wasn't going to be perfect, but that I had struggles and that I needed help, and I needed grace as well. And so the way that she received me in that, and I think because I was able to be so transparent and so honest with her, I think it made her feel like, okay, I can actually trust him. And it was another huge layer. So there are many different things that we've done with tremendous intentionality to have the relationship that everybody gets to see that, again, I think sometimes makes them want to irp, until they realize two things. Number one, it's not a show. It is real. And you have seen us in multiple different scenarios, sometimes where there's been tension, and how we handle it in real life under some high pressure situations, as well as seen us on the stage and, and so on and so forth. And we often say, what you see is what you get. And it's not a head wagging, hand on the hip kind of what you see is what you get. It's just that we are who we are. And God has just really done a great work. And then we also have been very, very intentional. And what we've done is we've just tried to document our journey, not only in our marriage, but in other people's marriage that we've worked with over the years, because we've been in marriage ministry pretty much since we got married, long before we probably needed to be, But because we've always taught and led from such an authentic place, I think that for whatever reason, God's just given us a gift in this area to be able to reach people and help them through things that nobody else has been able to help them through.
Well, and I love that. I love the definitions you guys kind of put in place. I would almost call them rules of engagement. From a military background, like a lot of people will understand that, like, there are rules when you engage in warfare. And
right.
A lot of people, when it comes to their marriages, when it comes to their relationships, they don't have defined rules of engagement. We don't talk about this. We don't bring this up in conversation. And not that you can't talk about things, but there's a very direct and specific way that it needs to be addressed in a healthy manner. Now, you guys have done that really intentionally with one another. But I think one of the really cool things is, as a father, you have done that instrumentally different. Like, for me, even as a father, I look at my kids and they do things, and I'm like, my brain is like, hold back. They're just kids. And like, sometimes it's just, like, I'm like, don't yell. And then, 5 seconds later, I'm yelling. I'm like, what? You made a pact with Julie that you guys were never going to yell at your kids.
Yep.
I want you to hear this. They made a pact that they were never going to yell at their kids. And when you meet their kids are highly respected. Like they're very respectful of them. But one of the things that's really crazy about this is, and I think a lot of this has to do with the way that you see your children. You see them as whole individuals that need love, and they need someone caring and someone to listen to them. In fact, when Willow and I were staying with you and Julie for a short stint, as we were going through some marriage stuff, we were talking with you guys, and you guys were coaching us. And there were a couple of times where your kids came in, and you guys looked at both of them and said, "Hey, just one moment. We're just going to say hi to them, and then we'll come back." There is a pattern of respect that you show your kids. How did you develop that type of mentality going into raising your kids, going from that domineering perspective of maybe growing up to, like, even in military, of like, it's a dominating perspective. I'm the boss. You're going to do what I'm going to do. You're going to do what I tell you to do. Otherwise, there's going to be consequences. How do you shift that around? Was it really that easy to make the decision and never again? Or was that a continual process that you had to renew your mind in?
Again, I really appreciate your questions today, Nathan. First of all, I think that what we have tried to do in our marriage, our parenting, in business and otherwise, is we try to solve for X, In other words, what is the desired outcome? What do we want? And it's a difficult question. And as coaches, that it's probably the question that we ask more than any other question, because people generally don't readily really know what it is that they really want, because it's buried underneath a lot of different obligations and, other people's impositions and what they should want, or even what they want to want, but don't really want. Right. And so there's lots I could say about that, but I'll refrain and just say that when it comes to our kids, we realized that behaviorally, when you yell at kids, what happens is you just make nervous kids, and it causes them to be not confident and self-confidence. And Lord knows that our identity, who we are, right, who we really are, is and is always under attack. And I just didn't want to do anything that would contribute towards distorting their identity and who they were, or making them nervous kids. There was a lot of yelling in my house, yelling back and forth between parents and step parents, and then yelling at us as a kid. And I can just remember how it used to make me just so incredibly uncomfortable. Now, I need you to know, we rule with a firm hand, a very firm hand. And I think you've been around enough to know that that's also true. Yeah. I'm not afraid to make sure that my kids understand exactly how this is going to go. You know what I mean? But I always give them options. Like, you can do whatever you want to, but at the end of the day, you're going to suffer the consequences if you make the wrong choice. And if you make the right choice, then what happens is you get what you want, which is more privileges and more freedom. But that's the only way you get it. You don't get it by having another birthday. You get it by showing that you can handle responsibility. And the more that you can handle responsibility, then the more freedom you get, obviously, because I don't have to manage you, and I don't want to, by the way. I'd rather be doing other things. We just agreed. We had a conversation, and we talked about that very fact, that it makes nervous kids when you yell at them. And so from that point forward, I'm not going to say that we never yelled at them. I can think of a couple of instances, in particular with one of them, that I got really angry and I yelled. But the other thing that we did, it was really rare, first of all, but the other thing that we did is that we were quick to go back and apologize. So once I got myself together, and once I was able to cool down a little bit, then I did whatever it took in order to make amends with my kids in that moment. And when I say whatever it took, I don't mean I went and bought them new cars or, any superfluous, things of that nature. I just went with my heart in my hand, not my hat, my heart. And I offered it to them. And you mentioned respect. Our kids don't just walk in and interrupt. They're not allowed to do that, and they know better. But if we know that they're around, and, in this case, when they were around, they're adult kids. They're, probably 19, 20, 21 at the time you were here. And, if we knew that they were leaving or whatever, it's like, hey, guys, can you give us just a second? We'll make sure and, address the kids before they leave. I realized that at one point, this was in particular with my son, as I was parenting him through the years. He's been a challenge for me, probably too much like me, and so I remember really struggling with the fact that he was so disrespectful sometimes, and I feel like God just convicted my heart and said, "If you want respect, you got to give respect." And I realized how often I was still talking to him as though he was a little kid. And I wasn't trying to be disrespectful to them when they're little kids, but you just simply need to talk to little kids a little bit differently than you do older people, right? You've got to get on their level, and sometimes you've got to get on their level, and then sometimes you need to be just a little bit firmer, obviously. Anyway, as I begin to address my kids with respect and be very intentional about approaching them with questions instead of directives, and help leading them that way, lead like I would want to be lead, and talk to them like I would want to be talked to. What happened is it not only taught them how to do that, but they reciprocated and gave it back to us. Took a little bit of time, but it didn't take a lot of time because of the intentionality, I think. And so I'm just so grateful that God pricked my heart about that, because I was the one that was screwing it up first. They were just reacting and responding like most people do. We don't do what we're told. We do what we see. And so I needed to demonstrate something different. Didn't always get it perfect, but I needed to be intentional about demonstrating something different.
Well, I love the intentionality that both you and your wife go into your relationships with. And I think that it goes across the board with how you live, is that you give what you want. If you want to receive love from other people, if you want to receive love from your kids, you got to give it. If you want to receive respect from your kids, you got to give it. If you want your kids to trust you with things, you have to trust your kids with things. And that's not like, and hear what he's saying too, and hear what I'm saying. This isn't just a blind, like we give the kids the car and they're 5 years old and they're driving down the park and they'll be fine. Like it's okay. Like it's not a blind giving. It's a building of trust. It's a building over time. It doesn't just happen overnight. This conversation, I love it so much, Greg, and I appreciate you jumping on. I know so many people right now are taking notes because this truly is an inspiring conversation. I know that it's going to inspire people to change their marriage, change things in their life for the better. And if you're listening right now, I want you to stop what you're doing. Go check out Married for a Purpose, because if you have a marriage right now that you feel like is death, like it's in the rocks, it's in the rubbles, and you want new life breathed into it, or maybe you were like, Willow and I were a while back, that our marriage wasn't necessarily bad, but it could definitely be better. And maybe you want to take your marriage from good to great. Go check out Married for a Purpose. You can go there, www.marriedforapurpose.com. They have books, they have programs, they have coaches who are well certified and trained, who can help you transform your marriage to really experience the type of life that Greg and Julie talk about so often. And I know this, and my wife knows this, because we have experienced this transformation in our own life. Greg, community is a huge aspect of growth. You and I both know this. Who you surround yourself is incredibly important. Having the right people around you. It kind of goes back to even our talk about of botany, of growing things in your life. You have to have the right soil. And I think a lot of people right now aren't cultivating the soil in their family. And I want to land on the family side of things, because I know marriage is a huge topic for you, but family is a huge topic. How do you cultivate good soil for your family? Whether you and your spouse are on the same page, or if you're on the different pages, how do you start to cultivate the right soil so that your kids can have an opportunity to grow, to be who they were created to be?
Well, I'll tell you what, it's interesting you framed it up the way that you did, Nathan. I'll tell you something that I feel like has really made a huge difference. We talked about earlier how Julie and I came together and we had a conversation about, hey, let's make a pact. We're not going to yell at our kids, right? If there's going to be punishment, then set the punishment, hold to the punishment. Don't make it, overly egregious, or out of alignment for the offense, but make it consistent, because what that does is that helps them build self-confidence. Little kids are humans. Big kids are humans. And as humans, our nature is to push until we find where the boundary is. It's because we want to know where the boundaries are. And I think a mistake that a lot of parents make is they set a boundary and then they waffle on it because they feel bad. And candidly, that's selfish parenting, because there's only one reason why you're doing that, you know. It's because, well, it could be for a couple of reasons, I suppose. But one would be because you set a more egregious boundary than what you should have, or an egregious punishment that wasn't apropos to the offense, or because you're going to feel bad because your kids feel bad and you're going to watch them cry or make them be angry at you or whatever. And those are terrible motivators in parenting. And so figure out what the boundaries are and then stick to the boundaries, stick to the punishments, and hold to it. And it's not that you can't offer grace from time to time. I think that there's a time and a place for sure that our kids need to experience it, and that we reference our Father, right, who has so much grace for us. But the thing that I think that has been maybe the biggest differentiator for Julie and I, aside from what has already been stated, is that you mentioned not necessarily being on the same page. Well, Julie and I, we parent and we automatically think from two totally different angles when it comes to parenting. Historically, once we got over the jealousies, you know, and all that silliness in the early years, it's been our Achilles. It's been the one thing that would trip us up if anything did. And so we made another pact, and that was that we would talk about what the desired outcome and what the desired result was in our kids and in our home and in our family, and we would unify. The Bible says that two are better than one. In fact, it says that one will put 1,000 to flight, two will put 10,000 to flight. So Grant Cardone has taken a lot of credit for 10X-ing things, right? And that's great. I don't take nothing away from him. But God was the originator of it. It's right there in his word. You want to 10X things? Unify. Unify. Don't be on different pages. Doesn't mean that you can't have different ideas, different opinions, or different methodologies. It means that you must come together, talk about those differences, and then present yourselves in a united front. And as Julie and I have done that over the years, the more that we've been really intentional about being careful not to undermine one another and be able to present ourselves unified, then our parenting and our relationship with our kids and one another has just continued to up level and up level and up level.
So I have one more question for you. And a lot of what we talk about, or I bring up on the podcast, is this idea of identity. And I love that you were talking about, you know, a lot of coaches today, they talk about outcome, they focus on the outcome, you know, what do you want? And that's a really great aspect. I think that you need to focus on that. Yep. But I think one of the other things too that we don't focus on as coaches is, who do you want to be at the end of this outcome? When you're in a fight with your wife or with your husband, or if you're in a fight with your kids, or, you know, maybe you're butting heads with someone, at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, who do I want to be through this process? Who do I want to stand as at the end? And I'm curious for you, as you unpackage that question for people of what do you want? And I think you do this, but how often do you actually ask the question, and how important is the question of who do you want to be at the end of this circumstance?
I mean, 100% of the time, if they're engaged, you know, at all with us, in fact, even in the parenting, I've found that, you know, identifying who you want to be and who you want to become and how you want to be known. How do you want to be known? When you're not in the room and people are talking about you, what do you want them to reference? What do you want them to say? And I think it's huge. And I'll take it. I'll stick the shovel in just a little bit deeper, Nathan, because this was really significant for me and Julie, and it's a significant part of our coaching practice as well. And that is that it's important that we pause and we get quiet from time to time and we ask God, who do you say I am? There's scriptures that, you know, Jesus talks about. He asked Peter, you know, who do you say I am? He asked the disciples, who do you say I am? And of course they responded. Several years back, Julie actually, God had asked her to ask him. He said, you say who I am, but I say to you, ask me who I say you are. And so she's like, okay, Lord, who do you say I am? Well, we have some good friends, and they asked me to do this. And the first time it was just felt so weird to me, you know, like so touchy-feely and so not my jam, but it did make an impression and it stuck with me. And so I often spend time asking, Lord, who do you say I am? And I listen to him and what he says. And the cool thing about it is by doing that, what happens is God never speaks ill things over us. He always affirms our identity, who he created us to be. So we help couples learn how to do this for one another too. Like, who do you say Julie is, Lord? And sometimes the best time for me to do that, in fact, the best time for me to do that is like if I'm irritated or frustrated with her, because he always speaks affirmations. And so I think that this is so key, Nathan, because anytime we say something about ourselves or about anyone else that isn't in alignment, perfect alignment with who God says they are, we're out of alignment with God. And more than likely, if we're saying something that's out of alignment with God and who God would say that this person is, including ourselves, then what we're doing is we are aligning with the enemy of our soul who hates your guts because you're made in God's image.
And I think we would even go further. It's not even just what you say, it's what you even think about that other person.
Yeah, because, out of the abundance of the heart, right? Like it's in there. And so I think that this would be a whole series of interviews, honestly, because it's a deep hole and it's a really good one to go down.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is that affirming in our kids who they are instead of, what are you, stupid? Or what the frick were you thinking when you did that? It's like, listen, you're better than that. I know you're better than that. We learn to replace those with that kind of language, right? And affirm the kids and their identity and who they are. I use identity all the time. And like I said, even with my kids, many times I'll ask them, who do you want to be? I'll even ask them to pick one or two people or even characters that they admire and tell me, what is it about that individual that you admire? What specifically is it about that person or that character? And I say character because I don't care if it's a real person or not, dead, alive, a superhero, whatever. It doesn't matter, because what it does is you're just creating imagery so that they can come back to it and ask themselves, what would that dude or dudette do in this particular situation? And then it can help govern our behavior. I do it with myself all the time.
I love that. That's so good. Greg, I really appreciate you being on the show. Such a powerful pact episode, and that I know so many people are truly going to grow and they're going to benefit from this. If you like what you're listening to today, remember to like this episode, follow us, and share this episode with a friend, because I know that this episode is going to add huge value, especially to your friends who want a better marriage. So until next time, remember to be more, see more, and experience more than before.